One important concept is that variable names are references to objects. This is extremely important. So consider this code. So we are assigning A to that list 1, 2, 3. B assigned A. And then we change the 0th element of the list. We add 100 to the 0th element of the list. The only question is, will A change or will A not change? That means are B and A distinct copies not interfering with each other, or are B and A referring to the same object and A0 will also get changed? So that is the question. Let me just run it and explain. A was 1, 2, 3, B was 1, 2, 3. In B0 we added 100. So naturally B will become like this, but A also become like that. And there is a nice utility called ID. ID basically means that if I have a symbol A, give me the identifier of the object to which A is referring. And you will see that these two IDs are the same. A and B are the same object. So let's analyze what happens when this code runs. So when the line number 2 runs, then this A gets created and A becomes a reference to this object 1, 2, 3. And when line number 3 happens, then B becomes the reference to the same object. Okay, so the picture to keep in mind is that A and B are just references to this object. There is just this one object and A and B are references to that. When you come to line number 6, basically what happens is that you change this 1 to 101. But where are you changing it? Are you changing it in B or are you changing it in A? The point is that there is only one object. There are only two references, but there is only one object. You are changing in that object. Both A and B are getting impacted. Now this concept will hold whether you are having list or maybe you are having a dictionary or maybe you are having tuple or maybe you created your own class or you are having string, anything. For everything, you can understand that these variables are references to that object. Now let's understand another program. A is 1, 2, 3 and B is assigned A just the same way. And later, instead of changing the element, 0th element, I am saying B is equal to some other thing, 4, 5, 6. Now the question is, will it impact A? Earlier we did something like this, B0 plus equal to 100. Then it had impacted A, we had seen. But now we are doing this thing. So what do you think? Will A change? Let me run it. A was this, B was this, and ID of A and B were the same before the line number 9 happened. At line number 9, what happened is, pictorially if I explain, so let's execute it one at a time. Line number 2, A was this. Line number 3, B was here. Line number 9, B stopped referring here, B started referring here. A doesn't change. And before this line number 9, A and B, I was getting the same IDs. You can see these highlighted IDs, they are the same. But after this execution, you can notice that B and A are having different identifiers because B is this object and A is still the same old this object. So B and A have different identifiers. Let's see one more thing. So variables are references, and when you pass an object to a function, what happens? Does the object get copied or the reference gets passed? The answer is the reference gets passed. So let's say there is this function. You define a function using def, you give it a name, and you give names of the arguments, and then you can do on that. We will see functions in more detail. It does a loop. It just increments all the elements, and when you pass it a list, you will see that the list gets modified. Why it gets modified? Because this L becomes a reference to this object. You can understand L1 is a reference to this highlighted object, and when you pass it as an argument, this formal parameter named L also becomes a reference to the same object. So if via this reference, if I modify that object, the change persists after the function returns. And you can see that it has persisted. I will just give one last clarification on this. When we say the names are references and via the references you are referring to the same object, a confusion arises for integers because if I apply that logic, so I can have some such logic. Line number 2, A is referring to this object. Line number 3, B is also referring to this object because int is a object. And line number 8, I add 1. So maybe very innocently thinking, I can say that at line number 8, it becomes 8, and after I print, A and B should both be 8, right? Because via the reference, I have modified it. So this doesn't happen that way. What you will find is A remains 7 and B becomes 8. So if you see, they were both 7, 7 and they were both the same object. After line number 8, B becomes 8, A remains the same. And if you notice carefully, the ID of A remains the same as earlier, but ID of B changes. What is actually happening is that B is disassociating from this old object and B is starting referring to this new object 8. Explanation behind this is that int is also immutable. When you say B plus equal to 1, then essentially you are doing B is equal to B plus 1. That essentially means that compute a new int object B plus 1 and let this B refer to this new object. So in that sense, this B starts referring here. So this is just to clarify that for int, you will not observe that behavior that if there are two references to that int object and you modify by one, or you pass a int to a function and that function increments the int, the change doesn't live. The rationale you can understand that int is a immutable object. If you have any questions or comments, please post in the comment box below.